In a world that can be challenging and at times unpredictable, it's hard to find moments to focus on what you need. Join Stephanie James on The Spark as she guides you to use your inner flame to ignite your best life. As a best-selling author, psychotherapist, transformational life coach, and international show host, Stephanie is dedicated to helping you create a life that takes you, your goals, and your passions to the next level, so you can live a life that is fully lit up and fully alive. She believes that your life is meant to be a beautiful expression of the things that light you up. That by living your dreams, you give permission to others to do the same. Are you ready to feel alive and inspired to fuel your dreams and put a fire behind your desires? Let's ignite a spark in one another that will illuminate the world. The Spark, with your host, Stephanie James, starts now.
Welcome to The Spark. I'm your host, Stephanie James. So thrilled to have you here with us. I'm very excited about my guest tonight, Clare Goldsberry. And Clare is talking tonight, we're going to be talking about her new book, The Illusion of Life and Death. I want to make sure I get the secondary title right, Mind, Consciousness, and Eternal Being. Clare, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate it.
I am so curious, before we even get started talking about your book, you've had a really interesting past yourself. Sounds like a spiritual seeker and teacher. Tell me a little bit about what brought you to this place.
Well, I've always been interested in religion and spiritual traditions, and clear back from my childhood, it was just seemed to be part of who I was. And I was going on this path from early on because I thought that somewhere out there had to be truth. There had to be the truth. And I didn't seem satisfied with a lot of the answers, so to speak, that were given to me in the Judeo-Christian tradition. I was raised mainstream Protestant Christian and by very religious parents, church, Sunday school and church every Sunday. But the answers just, the solutions, the problems in life and the solutions they didn't seem to mesh for me. So it was a long start. I had spent some time in the Mormon church. And in fact, the minister that at the church where I was attending before I joined Mormonism said, "Well, you'll join the Mormon church, Clare." And I go, "Why is that?" And he says, "Because you have a lot of questions and the Mormons have all the answers." And for a while, after I joined, it's like I believed that. And it was kind of interesting because that lasted 10 years. My life seems to go in 10-year cycles. So that lasted 10 years. And then I was out of that. And that resulted in a book, which is not in print anymore, but it is on my website, A Stranger in Zion. And it's about, the journey of someone who was raised Christian becoming Mormon and going through that. So it's kind of interesting. It got Best Religion Book of the Year by the Arizona Book Publishers Association back in 2001. And so it's available for free now. And then it also led me over the years after I began studying Buddhism and Hinduism and finding out that, wow, there's another path, a very different path that seemed to me to have the answers to many of these problematic situations that life presents. And I wrote that, it's called The Teacher Within, Finding and Living Your Personal Truth, because I came to the realization that truth is really within. And I think the thing that really drove me to that was the whole Jim Jones thing in Guyana just really got to me. I I was astounded, I guess, that, 900 plus people could do what they did, because this man had the truth. And I think that's what really kicked off this whole thing. So that was the beginning of my journey, and that's where I am today. I love the Eastern traditions, Buddhism and Hinduism, particularly Hindu philosophy, and I practice Buddhism to some extent. But I've developed my own philosophy of life and my own theology, I guess you could say.
But how beautiful. It sounds like it's been this amazing journey and wonderful, like eclectic blending in your search for the truth. And I really believe that, that it is each one of our own, that's like the answering of our heart, finding out what our own truth is.
Exactly.
And so I love hearing about your journey. It just, to me, I feel like it's so helpful for people that it doesn't, all the different religions and all these different philosophies, that they're just pointers for us.
Right. And they kind of all have contributed to my path. I don't, there's nothing wrong with any of it or bad about any of, what I did to get to this point. It's all part of the path. It all contributed to my understanding and my development of my own personal truth.
Yeah, exactly. I love that there's beauty and truth in all of the religions and all these different spiritual traditions. And then it was like, oh yeah, this is one that really speaks to my heart. Oh, this is one that really fits for me. And
right.
Part of my bigger or deeper inner belief system.
That's true. That's true.
Wonderful. Well, let's talk a little bit about the book. I'm so curious about this because I think especially right now with the pandemic and all these different things, this fear of death has become just so huge. And we're seeing this fear mongering all over the planet. So, we're living in this fear-based place. I'm curious then, I know that this was part of this was out of the loss of your partner, Brent.
Right.
This journey. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, when he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, and this was a number of years ago that this happened, it's taken me a long while to kind of get, I kept a journal, and that resulted in this book, The Illusion of Life and Death. And his whole attitude toward it was so amazing. I'd never really known anybody like him. He was very fearless. Life just didn't bother him. He just kind of went with the flow. He would get a new job, or he would lose a job and he would get another job, and he was just always involved very deeply with life and going with what was and not allowing anything to really upset him. And when he got the diagnosis of esophageal cancer, he looked at me and I was just stunned. I was just like, I'd never known anybody that had cancer before. And he looked at me and he said, oh, well, this should be another excellent adventure. And I was like, I didn't know what to make of that, because I really didn't know how to respond to it, because, the first thing you think of is, oh my goodness, how am I going to, the I gets thrown into it, how am I going to deal with this? And what if he dies and I am, left without him, blah, blah, blah. So it was just, it was very shocking to me, really. And yet, even though I had studied Buddhism for a while, and Buddhism talks a lot about death and dying and how we should always remember death, that all is impermanent, it was still another learning process I had to go through. Because you can read about death intellectually, you can read and there's many books out there about death and dying. And you think you know it until it hits you in the face, someone you love, or even maybe with yourself. And you go, now, what is the universe trying to teach me? Because there's more than just this intellectual understanding. There's got to be this deeper level understanding if we're really going to live fearlessly and have a good death.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So already, I mean, I'm so struck by his attitude and the way that he, looked at it as
Yes.
another adventure, and the experience of his life. And so, and as you ended, you said, having a good death. What does that mean to you? What is having a good death?
Well, I think, and this is what Brent's death taught me, I really think that having a good death is one without fear, being willing to die when it is your time, not fighting it, not, this, people think of death, and often you'll see in obituaries, he battled cancer or he battled or whatever. And Brent always said, this isn't a battle. He says, this is just going with the flow of my life. And I think that a good death is one that doesn't involve this idea of fighting it. Or like the Stoic Seneca said, a good death is dying willingly, living a good life, willingly a good life, and then dying willingly and not fighting it. And I think that's really, and without fear. And I think that fear, as you pointed out, is something we're facing all over the world. And primarily it is the fear of death. No one wants to die. No sentient being wants to die, from the smallest ant or microbe even to, the largest mammals. And I think it's the fear that often causes us to not be able to live well. Because I think that Brent's experience, his 18-month experience, showed that we can live well in the face of things that we think are negative or we have an aversion to. In Buddhism, it's no attachment, no aversion. It's that middle way, being able to embrace all as the path.
Well, and I think that's so powerful, and I can remember, going to graduate school. This is all the way back in 1994. But I remember driving down from Fort Collins to Denver, going to graduate school. I'd commute and listening to Deepak Chopra. He had a tape at the time. I remember I had a little cassette tape I'd put in my car on the higher self. And he would talk about that principle of detachment. And I think for a lot of people, that's hard to get because they hear detachment and immediately what comes to their mind is, oh, that must mean not caring.
Exactly.
So can you help kind of flesh that out a little bit more?
Well, and I call it non-attachment more than detachment. We don't really detach from anything as much as we develop this philosophy and this attitude of non-attachment. And non-attachment has been so helpful to me in the past 25 years of my life since I learned about it, because non-attachment allows us to free ourselves from being ego involved with other people, with their lives. Yeah. It frees us from thinking that materiality is all there is. It frees us from believing that all is impermanent, that all is permanent, and we develop this impermanence. I've heard it said there's really nothing to be attached to because nothing is permanent. So why do you want to get attached to anything? Because everything that we can think of, whether it's a relationship, whether it's material possessions, whether it's a job, whatever, and even the things that bring us the most pleasure, we know are limited. They're transitory, they're temporal, they don't last. Mm-hmm. And so if we go into everything thinking that this is going to be forever, that's when a loss comes along and we begin to suffer. And so in Buddhism, they say that all suffering is rooted in the fear of loss. But if we develop this philosophy and attitude of non-attachment, then the loss doesn't cause us to suffer. We're willing to accept the loss, knowing that it was never permanent in the first place.
So powerful, Claire. I love this because it really, wow, if we embraced our lives in this way, because we know this, we keep this, we kind of do everything possible to distract ourselves from that reality. Like we do, we're born and pretty clearly, I can remember being about 6 years old when I really understood like, oh, people die, like we're not going to be here. And then being, crying to my dad when he was holding my hand going to sleep and just being like, I don't want anyone to die, really having that awareness. And I think about if we were able to just make peace with that from that early age, if we could start adapting that kind of belief structure, as you were talking about, where we know that it's okay, that this is part of our journey, it's part of the ride, that it's not going to last. And so knowing that we can embrace it without being fearful all the way, because it's clinging, being afraid of losing things, whether it's, like you said, relationships or material. So how do we do that? How do we develop this place of non-attachment?
Boy, it takes a lot of practice. You don't just do it overnight. And I think that, as I said, it's been a very important practice for me because I had never heard of such an idea before until I began studying Buddhism and then ultimately the Hindu philosophies. It just starts with the realization that even though we believe that everything is permanent, it's not. And even the quantum physicists tell us that everything is empty of inherent existence. And we have to learn the contribution that our minds take to give us this physical world, to give us all phenomena. And when we realize that everything is created in the mind by the mind, and nothing has any inherent reality from its own side, and that's a very scientific concept to embrace, but it's also very Buddhist in that we live in a conceptual reality, not an ultimate reality or a realer reality, which consists of what we cannot touch, hear, see, etc.
Wow. Yeah. So again, I mean, these are such amazing constructs to really allow ourselves to start to embrace and think about, how powerful our minds really are. Number one, right? To create.
Right.
And it reminds me too of, good old Wayne Dyer, who would say, believing is seeing. So it's really, our reality is so influenced by the thoughts we're thinking, the beliefs that we're already holding, which then are, contribute so much then in what we're seeing or experiencing. So I'm hearing like with this non-attachment that is the same thing as we move more into a practice of that. And I'm imagining it's like a daily practice that you continue to embrace, that you're able to start seeing maybe through that veil, you're able to lift that veil.
I think that's very true. Yes. It doesn't happen overnight for sure.
Yeah. Well, there's so much more that we have to chat about. This is just such, I think, an interesting and absolutely apropos subject for our times right now. So I'm going to be back. We're going to take a quick break and I will be back. We're going to be back with Clare Goldsberry talking about her amazing book, The Illusion of Life and Death. So join us in just a moment. Welcome back to The Spark. I'm your host, Stephanie James. I'm here with Clare Goldsberry and so excited to talk with her about this really phenomenal and such important subject. We're talking about life and death and her book, The Illusion of Life and Death, Mind, Consciousness, and Eternal Being. So Clare, let's talk a little bit more about what you learned, in your journey, not just with Brent, but also in your studies. talk a little bit about this, life after death. What are your thoughts about that? Because I know that people embrace different ideas about what happens when we're no longer here. Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy and how this may have played into how you accepted or how you went with the flow of what was happening in Brent's journey?
Well, I think that part of the inability for Western people to die well is this idea that we only have one life, that it started at X moment and it ends at X moment. And the idea of one life is really very limiting. And of course, in the Christian tradition, no one talks about reincarnation or rebirth. They may talk about resurrection, but it doesn't really solve many of the problematic theologies that we encounter. And I think that part of being able to have a belief in reincarnation really helps us understand that we do not have just this one life. There are many books out there on near-death experiences, on people who have recognized their previous lives, who have actually come back and been able to recognize where they were born before and who their parents were. And I think it's primarily in India, you read a lot about these people that recognize, because they obviously believe in that. And so when you believe that you have gone on, that there is a life after death, that it's easier to maybe remember those things. So I think nobody really knows what happens after we die. I think it maybe is different for everybody. And maybe if our mind creates our reality on this level of consciousness, that perhaps our mind continues to create a reality of what happens after we die. What are our expectations? They say that people who believe that they'll see Jesus after they die will see Jesus. Maybe it's part of that creative energy that our minds have. And of course, people talk about soul. The soul moves on. Well, in the Greek word for soul is psyche, which obviously is a term we use in mind, such as psychologist, a psychic, a psychiatrist. And so I think we have to remember that consciousness continues. We're always aware on some level. We're aware when we are dreaming. We're aware on very subtle levels of consciousness. And I don't think that ever leaves us. People are consciousness when they're put under anesthesia. So I think it's good to know that there is something, although many people believe there is nothing. And it's wherever you're at on this level. You just have to figure it out.
Well, and it's interesting when you say that again, it reminds me of Wayne Dyer's last book was called Memories of Heaven. And it was, he and his secretary had gathered thousands of letters from all over the world of those kind of experiences where these kids were talking about past lives. They were talking about who they were before they got here, what they did, what certain birthmarks or certain things meant that there's no way they could have known.
Right, right.
Looking at a grandfather's picture and saying, or a great grandfather's picture and saying, oh, there's John, and they're like, what? So I find that really fascinating. I'm curious, how does it help us if we do believe that there's life after life or reincarnation?
Well, I think that all of us like to believe that the I, who I am, doesn't end. Obviously, our bodies die, our bodies end, but what about who I am? What about everything I've experienced? And there's a couple of different ways of looking at that, even in the Eastern philosophies. In Hinduism, they believe that who you are, you carry your karmic implications, your thoughts, your deeds. You carry that lifetime from one incarnation to another. That you're in a different body, but you're essentially the same continuation of who you've always been. You carry the things you've learned, the lessons you've learned throughout all your lifetimes. Buddhism believes more a little bit differently, in that there's the non-self, the no self. So you're reborn. They believe in a rebirth, but you're not necessarily the self that you think you are. You're kind of a different self. So I've kind of looked at all of these different ideas about reincarnation or rebirth, and really feel like that through reading about other people who've remembered their past lives and so forth, that we really do carry through our lifetimes with maybe not who we are specifically, but we've got this storehouse that we've created all of our experiences, and that those will help us in future lives. And I think that's, in a way, very comforting. And I think if more people thought like that, maybe their life would be a little better here, maybe more hopeful. I don't know. But I find it very, very comforting. I like that idea. I've kind of adopted that for myself.
Yeah. Well, I like that idea too. What actually, as I hear you say that, I think it makes me feel like, wow, then life really does matter.
It does.
You know, and what I'm doing in this life really matters.
It does. Yes.
Yeah. And that brings me to another thought. You know, I know in Hindu traditions, you know, in some of those other Eastern traditions, they talk about the law of karma. What are your thoughts about that?
Good old karma. There's a lot of thoughts about karma. I mean, people throw that word around now, you know, just secularly, you know, oh, karma got him, you know.
Yeah.
And I think people tend to think of karma as, well, it's just, it's retribution, it's getting even, you know, somebody in the universe gets even with you because you did something, you know. And I think that what we have to remember is karma just means action. It doesn't mean good action, bad action. It's all actions. It's body, speech, and mind, how we live our lives, really. And we can gain merit for the good things we do. You know, good comes back to good. And the same token, when you do things that are not so good, you're going to reap that too. The only Christian verse that I can think of is when Jesus said, as you reap, so shall you, as you sow, so shall you reap. So you do have that idea within Christianity that we are responsible for what we do. A lot of people don't like that idea. They don't want to feel like that. Well, this happened to me because of something else I did. And I think karma can get muddled, especially when it's used in a secular nature. That comedy that was on TV for maybe 1 or 2 seasons, My Name is Earl. And Earl, you know, had the whole karmic thing going, and he was trying to run around and apologize to everybody he'd ever hurt because he lost a lottery ticket that, you know, he said, oh, it's because I did bad things and I lost my winning lottery ticket, you know. So I think we have to be careful with the idea of karma. And I think it takes a lot of study and contemplation to really get the idea of karma, so that it's not a hurtful thing for people. People don't need to feel like that it's, somebody beating up on them from outside the universe. But it is a responsibility that we have, not only for our benefit, for the benefit of all, that we watch our body, speech, and mind, watch all of our actions.
Mm-hmm. So important. Oh my goodness. So vitally important. And it makes me think about, I believe it's the Boomerang Effect in quantum physics,
Yeah.
which now, we have science that proves so many of these quote unquote philosophies or belief systems, which truly is stating exactly that, our thoughts, our words, it's all energy. And, obviously our intentions and actions. And so as we put that out, that same energy, there's a continual loop, and it does come back to us.
Yes, it does. What goes around comes around, right?
Right. We've heard that forever, right? So
no, we never knew what it really meant.
and now we know. So what with things that happened with Brent, did he speak to you about some of these things? I mean, I'm really curious about his journey and what you learned just from his wisdom.
Well, Brent didn't have a religious foundation or a spiritual foundation. His own father died of stomach cancer when Brent was 16 years old. And he sort of learned then that things happen that we often don't understand or we didn't want to happen. But at that point, he also learned that he didn't have to fall into this pit of, being sorrowful all the time, feeling sorry for himself, that sort of thing. And so he said he really became more fearless after that. He really learned that, life is going to hand you things you don't want, but you know what? It's up to you to figure it out and move on and live your best life. And so he was just that way. He had a great sense of humor all through this. I mean, it was really rather amusing. People just got the biggest kick out of him. And it was kind of the lighter side of his journey of illness. But he was really, he never looked at it very seriously at all. In fact, he thought that knowing about when he was going to die and what he was going to die of was very much a benefit. He says, I'm luckier than most people. He said, most people don't know when they're going to die or what they're going to die of, but I do. So he said, the mystery for me is gone.
Wow. So for him, did he just get on with living his life that 18 months?
He did. He rejected chemotherapy. The oncologist said, well, if you don't have chemotherapy, you're going to die. And Brent said, dude, I'm going to die anyway. He said, I just want to live the life I want to live. He did choose surgery, and very good surgeon. And he lived for 18 months, which is rather long for esophageal cancer patients. But he just went on with life. He had the surgery. He went back to work. We traveled. He attended conferences with me because my business required I go to all these conferences in great places, by the way, like Hawaii. And so, but he did. He just kind of went on with life, and he didn't think a lot about himself. He didn't really think about that. So I think that helped a lot.
Yes. What an incredible teacher he is. Truly. I mean, so there's this, and I'm hearing the power in this message. It's like embracing death and embracing life.
Exactly.
And when you embrace both of them, then it's like the quality of your life just increases that much more.
Right. Yes. He didn't really want his life to be, he said, I don't want my life to be nothing but doctor's appointments and treatments. He said, I'll do what I think is best, and then I'll go on and live my life. And I thought that was really telling about the kind of person he was, that he could live fearlessly and he could die fearlessly as well.
Yeah, so powerful. Well, we're about to take another break here. When we come back, we'll be continuing our conversation with Clare Goldsberry. We are talking about her book, The Illusion of Life and Death, Mind, Consciousness, and Eternal Being. So come on back and join us. And in the meantime, if you have a moment, check out my website, stephaniejames.world, and sign up for a free exploratory breakthrough session with me. And you'll also get a free gift of a visualization called Igniting the Sparks Within. So happy to serve you and so excited to be part of your journey. So we'll be back with you in just a moment. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to The Spark. I'm your host, Stephanie James. We're continuing our conversation tonight with Clare Goldsberry. And we've been talking about life, death, karma, my gosh, meaning, purpose, non-attachment. And one of the things, Clare, that you've spoken about a couple times is this difference between, I'm hearing like consciousness, mind, brain. Can you help us kind of navigate through all that?
Well, I think that there's always this confusion between mind and brain. And a lot of even the science books that I study, the quantum physicists, some will even designate mind and brain as the same thing. And however, I've come to believe through studying science and Eastern philosophies that the brain is a finite physical object, obviously. They can open our skulls, they can do brain surgery, they can find out what's there physically. Einstein even donated his brain to science. They wanted to look at his brain and see if they could tell why he was so smart, why he was such a genius. Is there something in his brain that's different from the rest of our brains? And there really wasn't. So that's where the mind comes into play. The mind is an infinite sea of consciousness. The mind is, the way I like to put it for people that's really easy to understand is the brain is the hardware and the mind is the software. So, the brain connects with the nervous system and the senses, and so that we know what we're tasting and touching and seeing and hearing. But the mind gives us our perceptions of these things, which is why all of us have different perceptions of life. All of us see the world around us in a different way. It's kind of like two people looking at a Picasso, for example, and one person says, wow, that is the most beautiful painting I've ever seen. I love the colors. I love the geometric shapes. And the other person says, that is the most awful painting I've ever seen. It means nothing. And so you have two people that see the world differently. And obviously there's millions of us and we all see our worlds differently. We perceive differently. So I think that's the easiest way to think of mind and brain. The mind, or soul, if you will, is something that endures, that conscious awareness that endures, where the brain, being a physical part of the body, does not.
Yeah, great distinction. And one of the things I've learned too is that the mind, if we think they're the same, we think that the mind is contained in the brain,
right.
But the mind is everywhere throughout all of our being, throughout all of our cells. It's even bigger than our limitations of our physical body.
Right.
So it's, it becomes really mind-blowing when we think about.
Right. Well, all is mind. When you think about it, even the tiniest ant has mind. Everything has mind. Like you said, it's throughout all of us. Even the universe. Amit Goswami's The Self-Aware Universe, great book, but it talks about, how mind is everywhere. All is mind, because everything is created in the mind by the mind, and nothing has any inherent reality from its own side. And I think that helps us kind of understand the the place of mind in the creation of everything around us.
Yes. Yeah. Fascinating. Well, I'm curious too. One of the things in your book, you related some of this understanding the things we fear to the Harry Potter series. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I remember I first saw that part of the film when I was watching that Harry Potter movie. And I thought, that's it. That's it. If we truly do create our reality, our world around us, then we also create our fears. We create the things that we fear. And in Harry Potter, the teacher was teaching them the ridiculous spell. And the students were supposed to think of the thing they feared the most. And when they thought of it, it became a reality. And whether that's a spider, a monster of some kind, it became a reality because thoughts are things. And what they did next was they had to take their magic wand, point it at the thing which they feared the most, and shout, ridiculous. And the minute they did that, the thing they feared the most disappeared. So maybe that's a good practice, the ridiculous practice that we all need to practice, because everything is created in the mind. Thoughts become things. We fear things because we think of the things that may harm us. We fear loss of things. We have all these fears, which are ridiculous, actually.
Well, yeah, this is so great. This is, as a psychotherapist, I deal with this a lot in my office. I have clients that come in and I always say, if you're going to fantasize when we're thinking about the future, it's always fantasy. It's not here yet. And when people are worrying and stuff, I said, well, if you're going to create a fantasy, you might as well create a good one. And so make up something wonderful for the future instead of what you fear, and then reel yourself into the present moment. And that, Claire, for me has been one of the most powerful things as well, and powerful lessons, that what we think in this moment becomes real for us. And we really do experience it physiologically. So, instead of regretting, why did I do that in the past? Or why did this happen? Or, oh my gosh, what's going to happen in the future? We can really start creating realities and our, future realities much better if we're in the present moment, and we can hold on to thoughts of what we want to create. Or if we're going to remember something, remember a memory that just fills us with those really good feelings, and we can bring all of our senses into it, and we're re-experiencing it as happening now.
Right. It's a way not to suffer. Again, it's part of that, non-attachment or no aversion, creating fears. That's all part of our suffering that we create. And often people get attached to their suffering, and you think, well, why is somebody always pessimistic? Why are they always looking for the worst things in life and so forth? And you think, well, maybe that person is kind of addicted to suffering. In fact, it's been said that often it's easier to become addicted to suffering, because suffering gives us something that maybe we can't get otherwise. Maybe we get empathy from people, or sympathy. Maybe it solves some sort of problem that we had, and we think our suffering will atone for that. But I think we have to be careful with suffering, because it can ruin our lives. And most of our suffering comes from our thoughts. We may have physical pain. There may not be much we can do about that, but maybe take an aspirin or something. But we can do something about our suffering. We can choose not to suffer.
Claire, this is so essential. I love that, because I can remember back to reading Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled. And when he said life is difficult, it was one of the first lines of the book. And I remember just tossing that book at that moment, because I was like, I don't want to hear that life is difficult. Although we all have challenges and we all have difficulties, because I think at the time I equated it to life is suffering. And I don't think life has to be suffering. I think we have to break through that paradigm that is, we are co-creators in this life. And so we have so much more power to create what we experience in this life than we imagine.
Right, right. Yeah, you think life is difficult is a negative phrase. The first noble truth of the Buddha is life is pain and suffering. And people think, wow, that's not very encouraging. But of course, the second noble truth is, but you only suffer when you want things to be different than they are. And I think if all of us look at our lives and when we find ourselves suffering, it's because we want life to be different than it is. And Brent said just to me just before he died, he said, don't put this in my obituary that, he had this, he suffered, I didn't suffer. He said, I never suffered because I never wanted life to be different than it is. So I think that's important to remember. Look at yourself. How is your mind behaving? Do you want things to be different? Do you want a newer car, a bigger house, a more handsome spouse, beautiful spouse? And then look at what that does to your thoughts and how you create your suffering by wanting life to be different than it is.
Absolutely. What a beautiful practice if we actually held that as
Yes.
a meditation, maybe that we did in the morning, where
Perfect.
we're
Yes.
focused on, and to me, that's that practice of gratitude and being thankful for what is. And when we step into that, how that can instantly change how we feel.
Exactly.
Yeah. When clients say to me, "Oh, I bet you don't get triggered anymore." Of course, I first laugh, because it's like, as long as we're human, we're going to have experiences and perhaps be triggered at times. And, I tell the story about getting out of the car and I had to walk 2 blocks to work and hearing this old song before I got out of the car that reminded me of a boyfriend, and we had a bad breakup. I mean, this is, decades ago. And I'm walking to work going, I am angry. Like, I'm remembering all these things, none of it, of course, happening now, like we talked about, but I'm having that physiological response. Well, I had about 15 minutes before I had to go to work. So I stopped by this coffee shop I always stop at. And I sat out, it was a sunny day, sat out on the patio and pulled out my notebook and immediately said, I've got to start writing what I'm grateful for here and now and bring myself back here.
Yeah.
And literally by the second line, I could feel my whole being just go, just coming back into the now and how powerful that is and what
Yes.
we choose to focus on.
Exactly. Yes, that's embracing all as the path. And, not judging things good or bad. Things just are. And we must learn to embrace that because there's always lessons to learn. All of our experiences will ultimately benefit us. We just have to see what that is and learn to embrace it.
Beautiful. Yes. So Claire, what has your journey been since Brent's passing?
Well, it's been good. I kind of went on with my life. I had my own business as a journalist and freelance writer, and just always kind of putting together the ideas for this book. I kept a journal during the 18 months so that I could remember the really interesting things that happened, the tough times too. Toward the end, the dying process is often difficult to watch. He died here at home with hospice, and I had the book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And I read through the processes and I watched and sure enough, he was experiencing all these things that the book said, was part of the dying process. And I remember one time I looked at him and I said, well, I'm sure glad you're dying by the book, so I know what's going on. But that's something else that does help. I mean, if you kind of know, we don't know. That's, the uncertainty, the mysteries of life are what really get us, And I think that it does help to read and to study. Then when you're confronted by the grand realities of life, you're more able to embrace them and understand them and not be afraid of them.
Yeah. What a powerful process. And so you're still writing today.
Still writing today, always writing. I was called to be a writer when I was 10 years old, so I can do nothing but write, I suppose. But I think it's important. I feel like that my various paths that have winding around through different philosophies and religions and spiritual traditions that has brought me here has been very beneficial. And it's, I think a lot of people, I hope, will be helped by what I have to say and be helped by Brent's final words to me, which were, dying is so easy. He said, I thought it would be harder than this, but it's just so easy. And a little while later, he died. And I think that's a good thing to remember. I want everybody to know that Brent said dying is so easy.
Wow. So powerful. So powerful. Clare, where can people get your book?
Well, it's available at any of your favorite booksellers, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, your independent bookstores. I always believe in supporting independent bookstores. And so it's out there, so you may pick it up and I hope you enjoy it, because it's not a bad topic. It's not a terrible topic. I think the book was pretty hopeful, and so I think people will enjoy it. Thank you for supporting me.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is just an essential book. I truly do. I think, and these are the conversations we need to be having and need to be really sharing with people so people can step out of fear. Again, we live in this world right now where fear is so prevalent, and what a beautiful, comforting balm, I think, to people's hearts and souls to really start to explore this topic. So I'm so glad you shared this, Clare. And if you were to leave the audience with the essential message, if you were to kind of summarize that, what would you like to leave the audience with?
Well, I would leave the audience with the idea that we need to learn about life. We need to learn to look at our minds, to realize that we create the lives we have. We create our life. We can also create the death we have. We don't have to be afraid of living. We don't have to be afraid of dying. We just have to embrace it all as the path and learn to accept all that is, because we need it. This is what the universe says you need.
Oh, great. So beautiful, Clare. Thank you so much for being here with us. Such a treat. I know that I've learned something and this has ignited something in me. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thanks for tuning in to The Spark with Stephanie James. Remember that you already have what you need to live a life that is fully lit and fully alive. You're already holding the flame. Now it's time to ignite your best life. Learn more at stephaniejames.world. That's stephaniejames.world. And tune in next week at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, only on transformationtalkradio.com. Shine on!